Amen. Good morning, all 12 of y'all. How y'all doing? Great. Good to see everybody. In all seriousness, I know there are a few of us here this morning, but it's a privilege to share this morning. It's a privilege to come before our Lord and be able to worship Him, no matter how few that we are in number. So this morning, we will continue our series in Hebrews, and we will be in chapter 12. I know the day is gloomy. I know the time changed. And to add on to that this morning, the topic is the Lord's discipline. The Lord's discipline. So if Jake wasn't your favorite pastor before or after today, he is certainly going to be your favorite pastor. but but in all seriousness, entertain me a bit with your imagination as we wander into Hebrews chapter 12 and seriously entertain me. I want you to put faces to the illustration I'm going to do. I want you to put situations to that illustration. So imagine for a moment that you are experiencing some form of real suffering. Real suffering. Maybe a family member has treated you harshly. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe they abandoned you. Maybe they looked down on you. Maybe they weren't there for you. Maybe you've been stabbed in the back by a close friend or a close family member. Those who were once for you now seem not to be for you anymore. Instead, they seem to despise you. They seem to treat you harshly. They seem to be out to destroy you. Or maybe there is a health ailment that you are experiencing. Now imagine that all of that was for the sake of discipline and for the sake of Christ. Imagine that you weren't just suffering for suffering's sake, but for discipline. For many of us, that would shake our souls. And may I dare even say that it would cause us to question God. It would cause us to go into a place of unbelief. Yet God knows this, and He does not shy away from using suffering as discipline. 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 Think back to when you have been disciplined. Maybe it was by a parent. Maybe it was by a boss, or maybe it was even by a pastor. How did you respond? How did you receive that discipline? Some of us got disciplined and we grew from it and we matured from it. We listened to the discipline. But then there are others of us, most of us I would venture, that we got disciplined and we went right back to what we were previously doing. The old folks used to call that being hard-headed, right? But part of how we receive discipline is based on the character of who is giving it. We could say the foundation of discipline matters. You see, foundations are important. If your house is on a bad foundation, cracks will begin to show. Trees have roots that act as a foundation. If those roots are bad, the tree will begin to lean and possibly fall. Your body has a foundation, and if its foundation is weak, you may be shaky. You may begin to lean over. The author of Hebrews understands this concept and has built a strong foundation for his instruction that we are about to receive. We are in a section in this book where we are about to hear some instruction as it concerns discipline. These three things that I'm about to mention are the basis of the argument that the author is making for the Lord's discipline. First, we have the nature of who Jesus is. The book starts off and it tells us that Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God. He is the exact imprint of His nature, and He upholds the universe by the word of His power. Stated differently and more simply, but also more complex. Jesus is God. He is not creature. He is creative. He is greater than the angels, and He is greater than any created being, including you and I. And implicitly What that tells you is that we can take our concerns to Him. We can take our sufferings to Him. We can cry out to Him when we are in need. Therefore, Jesus is the only logical object of our hope. He is the only logical object of our worship. So number one is the nature of Jesus. Number two is what Jesus has done and His function. Jesus is our high priest in heaven. He does not sit under the Father. Instead, it says He sits at the Father's right hand in equality. And that is very great news for us because we have one that intercedes on our behalf, one that we can go directly to. That means we don't have to go through all these other sources to get to God. You don't have to go through a pastor or a priest or anybody like that to get to God. Our great high priest has done all that is necessary for us to have fellowship with God. The high priest also has another function. He deals with sin. An earthly high priest normally would require the people to bring an offering or a sacrifice in order to cover sin. But Jesus is our eternal high priest whose sacrifice is perfect and once for all. Therefore, there is no need to offer continual sacrifices to the Lord. We simply need to trust in His perfect work that He has already done. This means that we are right with God strictly on the basis of trusting in Jesus. But it also has another implication. It means that we are not helpless. In our weakness, we can cry out, "Our Father who is in heaven," and He hears us. He hears us because of our great high priest, Jesus. And as a result of what Jesus has done, we experience the new covenant blessing that is listed out in Jeremiah 31. We experience blessing that says, where God says, our sins and our lawless deeds, He will remember no longer. The key phrase there is no longer. So living in continual guilt and shame because of our past actions will do us little good. Jesus' sacrifice is final and is our hope. Finally, the author builds his instruction on what believers endured before us. Believers before us exercised faith and endurance and endured discipline because of Jesus' nature and His function. In chapter 11, the author speaks of Abel, Noah, and Abraham, and it says, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised. In other words, these people obeyed and exercised faith in God, even though they didn't get to experience the fullness of what God promised while they were still alive. They serve as an example to you and I of how to live faithfully towards God when we can't see Him, when we can't feel Him moving. Then it says Moses, by faith, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Here we see a great man of faith who rejected earthly comfort in order to receive what was better from God. He serves as an example of the discipline we must endure to receive the reward that God has for us. Finally, he speaks of others who were mocked, tortured, imprisoned, sawed apart, murdered, afflicted. And it says, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us. And that something better for us is eternal. It is something that cannot be taken away from us. It's entering into what the author calls God's rest. It is fellowship with God. It is true life. It is resurrected life. It is life without having to battle sin and evil. It is a life that is worth enduring a little suffering, a little testing, a little discipline. So the people before us in that chapter 11, they endured discipline and received their reward by it, waiting on God when it didn't seem convenient, rejecting the comfort of this world, enduring suffering and even physical harm. And this leads us to this place in chapter 12 where Jake was last week, where we see the author is able to say, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, the witnesses are the people from chapter 11, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. In other words, he says, things may be tough, but look at the examples that came before you. Endure as Jesus endured. The reward is great, and you haven't done all you can to battle sin. So 3 things have laid the foundation of the instruction we are about to hear. These 3 things, Jesus' nature, Jesus' function and what he's done, and the people who came before us. So that leads us into our passage today in Hebrews 12 verses 5 through 11. So if you would please stand and we will read scripture. Is that going to be up on the screen? Man, I'm thinking about making y'all read. What y'all think about reading? You do it? All right, let's read together. I'll try to read it the best I can. And it says, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Hey, y'all doing great. We're praying. We're going to get right to it. Father, thank you for today. And we just thank you for all that you've done. And we praise you, knowing that every great gift, every good gift, everything that we receive is from you through your Son. And we thank you for your Holy Spirit, which dwells in us who are believers. It makes us brothers and sisters. It leads us in wisdom that teaches us all things. Lord, have your way. I'm just here to share, but you open hearts. Your Spirit is the one who teaches. Your Spirit is the one who regenerates and gives us hope, God. It is not what I say. It is what you do. So go before God and just have your way with this. And thank you for this time that we have to worship you and learn about you. Help it be fruitful. Help me communicate effectively. Anywhere where I fail to communicate, please cover my area. And we just pray everything that we do. Amen. You may be seated. Man, I was impressed with that reading that y'all did, man. That was good. That was real good. So let's get started. The writer begins by asking this rhetorical question to make a point. Have you forgotten? Or have you completely forgotten What has happened to your memory? This is a brain argument. It is a logical argument. Okay? The question itself serves as a reminder not to forget. You see, when someone forgets something, it's as if the knowledge that they previously had is of no effect. Okay? Therefore, they will not be able to properly respond to certain situations, which means they cannot experience what is beneficial. Okay? For example, if we forget to pay our electric bills in July in Texas, we will be hot and we will be miserable. It will be difficult, right? And when we forget that the Lord's discipline has purpose, we don't experience the benefit of receiving and experiencing true life. Okay? Now, the object of the Hebrews forgetfulness is not. If y'all had your Bibles out, y'all will see this. The object of the Hebrews forgetfulness was an exhortation. Okay? An exhortation is a passionate appeal. This passionate appeal that they are being reminded of comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. Okay? Take note how they are being called to remember the scriptures. They're being called to remember the scriptures. In the same way, we must know the scriptures in order to understand what the Lord is doing. Or else we risk misinterpreting the Lord's discipline as his cruel. So be careful with that. Notice, even though the instruction is from the Old Testament, look how the appeal is a present and it's effective for now. This exhortation was not just addressed to them in the past, right? But it currently addresses them now. The scriptures are also effective and they address us now. So we should ask ourselves the same question. Have we forgotten exhortation? Have we forgotten what the Lord has to say about discipline? Has it slipped out of our memory? Okay? The exhortation, it starts. It says, my son. The exhortation here focuses on sons, but it does not exclude daughters. The reason that we know this is because back in chapter 11, we got Rahab as an example. In chapter 11, verse 31, it says, by faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Okay? You don't have to go back and read that story. But Rahab operated in faith. The example that the author gives here is not a random example. He is just not listing off random people. It is very strategic. I think the author is calling the women to remain faithful, like Rahab did, regardless of how the men in the community were responding to the Lord's discipline. In other words, ladies, keep being faithful to Christ, even if it takes us a little bit longer to figure it out. Okay? Keep being faithful. But overall, the instruction that is being given is a tender address to a child from a parent. It is not harsh. It is not condescending, but it is loving and nurturing. It shows how God deals with each one of us in gentleness and patience instead of harshness. Only after the gentle address, my son, does he begin to give instruction here. Therefore, the instruction is based in love. The instruction is in regards to the Lord's discipline, as we have been discussing. The Lord's discipline is what we can call our divine education. It is the Lord training us in Christ's likeness for the purpose of maturity. This is how we become conformed to the image of Christ. So the question is, how do we treat discipline from the Lord? How do we treat discipline from the Lord? When I was a teenager, I hated confronting my dad after I had messed up. And on one instance, I did something. I ran the car into the garage and doing what he told me not to do. And I didn't want to face him, so I lied. You know, I said, some kid at school hit my car. And I lied. I was trying to avoid the discipline. On a heavier note, I grew up with a mom and a grandmother who both experienced and had schizophrenia. I grew up in this house where I would see my mom in manic states, and I had many sleepless nights because of her manic states. I grew up with a mom who was unable to respond to the love that I was trying to give her. It wasn't her fault, but she couldn't respond. I was trying to love her and I couldn't. And this left this hole, this pain, this sense of abandonment, this sense of hurt, right? And I'm still dealing with the effects of it today. And I'm still dealing with the schizophrenia in my mom today. Yet I have to ask myself a question. Could God even use something like this? Could God even use something like this as discipline? I know the answer is yes. I know He uses those things for discipline. So again, how do we treat the Lord's discipline in our circumstances, in our situations? Do we hate it, reject it, run from it, fail to recognize it, lie and manipulate to get out of it? You see, I know us. We run from discipline. We dislike it. We don't want to face the truth because we know discipline will require patience, endurance. It may give us a little bit of pain, sacrifice, honesty. We know discipline means that we will have to reject what we want now, right? In order to get what God has for us later. These are just proofs, though, that our desires don't match the Lord's desires, which means we are not really mature. We're not to the place where the Lord needs us to be. It is proof that we don't believe that what the Lord has is best for us. Do we really believe that the Lord is good and has our best interest at heart? You see, we've already seen that discipline can be painful. Yet the author, when addressing the Jewish people here and when addressing us, he does not give us a way to get out of our situation. He does not say run or flee, nor does he seem to be sorry that we are experiencing discipline. He is not crying for you. Instead, the instruction is do not regard lightly the Lord's discipline. In other words, don't treat the Lord's discipline as worthless. Don't treat it with contempt. Don't reject the Lord's discipline, and don't act as if the Lord's discipline for some reason should not apply to you. If you go back and read the book of Proverbs where the author pulls this citation here, you will see that the person who rejects discipline is a fool. They are pictured as a fool, and they have no hope for a better future. In other words, the person who rejects discipline is setting themselves up for destruction. Discipline is God's act of providing guidance for responsible living. For us, it will teach us to navigate life as Christians. It's training us for skillful living in the future. Maturity does not come without discipline. Freedom does not come without discipline. Christ-likeness does not come without discipline. So we must accept the discipline the Lord is giving us. For us, that may mean praying for something and accepting God's answer of no, or His silence in changing a situation. It may mean accepting rejection from people or friends and not lashing out. It may mean holding our tongue for those of us who are timid, though. It may be having bolder conversations. It also may mean being patient as the Lord fixes a situation that we actually messed up. Or accepting circumstances that we are in without complaining. Accepting circumstances that we are in without complaining, without running. There was a time in my corporate career when I was working, and at the same time, I had to study for this CPA exam. I knew the Lord wanted me to pass this exam. Yet I whined, I complained, I tried to justify why I didn't need it, how it was taking too much of my time. But I knew God wanted me to pass this test for some reason. Okay? Yet I failed the test 5 or 6 times because I dragged my feet. I was whining, complaining, trying to justify why I didn't need it. But ultimately, after I passed the test, I realized that God was disciplining me. He was training my study habits so I could sacrificially minister to you all. And Jake and I, when we present something, we've studied for it. There's long hours sitting there in the quiet, trying to work things out biblically for everybody. So it helped me with my discipline and my study habits. So we don't reject the Lord's discipline, nor do we become weary when we are corrected by Him. You see, being weary suggests that you are tired of learning what God is trying to teach you. Therefore, it implies that you know what's best. Right? Those who grow weary will lack in endurance. But we see that being a child of God actually requires us to be enduring children. People who don't endure will be quitters and complainers. So let us not be stubborn children. Instead, let us gladly accept whatever discipline it is that the Lord is taking us through, whatever circumstance, whatever affliction that He is taking us through. Knowing that all things work together for the good for those who are called according to His plan. It's tough, I know, but we must keep in mind that the Lord's discipline is not in vain. We get an explanation of why He disciplines us. His discipline comes from a deep place of love. It says, in love, He chastises us. This means He puts pressure on us for the purpose of maturing. Notice that if you don't experience this pressure, then you are not a child of God, and you are not accepted or loved. The Lord only disciplines those who He has accepted and received as His children. So then the reproving and the correction are not for our harm, but for our benefit. His discipline and chastisement are actually a comforting sign. We should see it as a comforting sign that He has accepted us. And that is according to what the Scriptures say. Not according to our opinion, but according to what the Scriptures say. So it says, endure in verse 7. Endure for the sake of discipline. The purpose of the call to endure is so that we can be trained for Christian life. In verses 2 and 3 in chapter 12, we see that Jesus Himself, it said, endured the hostility of the cross. And His endurance led Him to being glorified. And we likewise will be glorified if we endure. Because He endured, as His followers, we must also endure. But we are not without power to do so. Back in verse 3, it says that Jesus endured so that we would not grow weary. So that we would not grow weary and lose heart. His endurance while suffering, His endurance in suffering is a call for us to do the same. And He provides the strength for us to do so. So what exactly is enduring? Enduring is to maintain the course of action in the face of opposition. Right? It's not just maintaining the course of action. It's maintaining the course of action in the face of opposition. The word implies that there will be unwanted circumstances that will tempt you to quit, that will tempt you to give up. But having endurance means that you won't quit. I remember in high school going to the track meets and watching the long distance runners. As they would come around the last lap, they would do this thing where they would push into their kick and they would start running harder than they've ran the whole race. And by the time they crossed the finish line, they'd be to the place where they needed so much oxygen that they were about to pass out. Right? You see, endurance means that you violently pursue the finish line until you cross it. It implies that when you finish, you won't have anything left. Those who endure will not quit what they have started. And endurance is how we obediently accept the Lord's discipline. Therefore, it is how we become mature in Christ. In verses 7 through 10, we get this parental illustration to reinforce the purpose of the Lord's discipline. It says, God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us that we may share in his holiness. First, we see we are being treated as children. We see God as a father who is hands-on. He does not let his children just live however they want to. If he left us without discipline, it would make us illegitimate children. Illegitimate here speaks of a child who lacks legal rights to be called a child. If you lack the legal right, then you don't get the inheritance. And our inheritance is salvation. So since we are legitimate, let us receive his discipline. Second, God is a father who is not hesitant to allow his children to experience pain. It's actually the love of God. It does not make him mean. Instead, it shows that he wants what's best for us. His discipline shows that actually he has not abandoned us. So then, for the sake of discipline, God will allow us to experience this pressure. And it's an act of love that leads to holiness. It leads to Christ-likeness. So then, knowing his character, knowing what he is actually like, not our opinions, but what it says biblically, knowing him, the key idea here is that we would submit, that we would be subject to whatever form of discipline that he would allow. So let us respect our Heavenly Father by accepting his discipline. Finally, in verse 11, the author confesses that discipline, it seems painful rather than pleasant. Discipline always feels harsh at first because we are experiencing some level of discomfort, some level of pain, something bad, something hurtful is happening to us. But notice he says it seems. That means it appears to be painful. So in reality, this is an issue of your perception. Right? It's an issue of perception. Because in actuality, God is not being harmful. He is not being mean. He's actually being loving in his discipline. So maybe instead of complaining, crying, questioning God to the point of unbelief, maybe we should ask God, so what are you trying to teach us during the circumstance? Maybe we should ask God for the strength to endure the discipline. We need to change our perception. God is actually disciplining us for the fruit of righteousness. In this way, we are being conformed to the image of the Son. We are becoming like Christ. We are becoming those who are actually his true followers. So I want to invite the band back up. And what I'm going to do is I just want to close with a few thoughts. Just thoughts. I just want to close with a few thoughts here. First, we should seek to be aware of when we are actually being disciplined. Do we even know when we are being disciplined? For those of us who are not very self-aware, we should ask questions like, or have others ask questions to us like, and maybe that doesn't need to be a spouse or somebody else. Maybe you should ask somebody else in the body. Ask questions like, what are the lessons that we just have to keep learning? What are the things that are repeated? Is there a situation in your life that continually occurs? Maybe that's from the Lord. What are the areas that we tend to run from because it's a little painful, a little uncomfortable? Where do we try to weasel our way out of things? What are the things that we try to justify that we don't need to do or that doesn't apply to me? What are the things that are hard for us? What causes us to lose patience and become weary and lose heart? Let us be careful that we are not running from the Lord. You see, because since God is loving, He is going to keep making you repeat that lesson. That would be the loving thing that He would do. So don't run. Learn the lesson. All of us have something the Lord is working out. So we should just be aware. Number 2, we should not think it strange when we start to experience the pressure of discipline. It's how the Lord treats His children. All the examples in Scripture show you this. Number 3, we should not let the discipline that we are experiencing become a stumbling block to our faith. You see, because what we like to do, we like to start to ask questions. If God was really good, then why would He allow this bad stuff to happen? He can't be really good. Now, I believe that we were experiencing proof. If you take that word, it should not like to happen. That's never just His proven character should always outweigh the circumstances and feelings that you have. That's why we remember the exhortation and passion and feeling of Scripture. God is treating us as legitimate children. And other times, we may begin to indulge in sin as a coping mechanism for the discipline and the pain that we experience. You know your sin. What's strength? Make yourself more soft, more depressed, more hurt, more pain. You have to repeat the lesson. Resist sin, learn the lesson. So finally, I'll close and I'll say, let each one of us, including myself, endure the Lord's discipline as a good child, as a legitimate child, understanding that His discipline is true, for holiness, for righteousness. He doesn't have to do. When I close, we're going to pray. We're going to have a time to worship. God will lead us and see that we're not so small. Praise God. He is our hope. He is our strength as we seek to endure whatever circumstance in life we allow in life. I know it's painful. I know it's painful. Because Lord, your love so that you may work whatever circumstance so that you may be informed. You will find not any circumstance, not obligation. Reject